Welcome to AMiNDR, a podcast where we summarize the latest publications on neurodegenerative disease research so that you can stay up to date with the newest findings. Every month, our team of scientists will sort and organize the titles into themes and present shortened versions of the abstracts. We'll make sure to mention the title, the journal, the first author, and the last author for each publication. Whether you're in the lab, on the bus, or cooking your meal, we hope you find this podcast helpful.
Hi everyone, this is Naila. I have a new microphone in my hand today, so hopefully from now on my voice will be more consistent from one episode to the next, or at the very least within episodes. So today I'll be kicking off our August 2020 paper summaries. If you're new to AMiNDR, just so you know, what we do is that every month we go through the new peer-reviewed primary research articles that were published on Alzheimer's disease research. This is a range of research, so we have a bunch of different themes that we categorize these papers into. And we double check that the papers are indeed from peer-reviewed journals and that they are primary literature, so that is new research articles. So we do this through a PubMed search. It entails a lot of sorting papers and a lot of summarizing and scripting and hosting. So we've got a big team and we're always looking for more help. All right, so let's get started. Today I'll be going through 1/3 of the modifiable risk factors papers that were published in August 2020. So we had about 50 papers in this category, so we've split it into three episodes, and this is part 1. Part 2 and part 3 should follow hopefully in the next few days, or at least within the next week. So today I will be covering 6 papers on diet. Then I have 6 papers on obesity, diabetes, and vascular risk factors, and then 1 paper on exercise. And you can tune in to part 2 and part 3 if you want to hear more about medical risk factors and comorbidities, hormonal risk factors and sex differences, and sleep. And then the 3rd episode will be on cognition and education, social support and other socioeconomic factors, as well as mixed modifiable risk factor studies or epidemiological studies. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump straight into the diet subtheme. So we're going to go through some papers that look at specific elements of diet, and then at the end of this section, we have a few studies looking at nutritional health more generally. This first paper was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease by first author Ma and last author Yu, and a whole list of authors in between. And this paper is entitled Associations of Green Tea Consumption and Cerebrospinal Fluid Biomarkers of Alzheimer's Disease Pathology in Cognitively Intact Older Adults, the CABLE study. This group wanted to determine how green tea consumption affects cerebrospinal fluid biomarkers, so that's CSF biomarkers, of AD pathology, and whether genetic background plays a modulatory role. The authors looked at data of CSF biomarkers and frequency of green tea consumption from 722 cognitively intact participants, specifically from the Chinese Alzheimer's Biomarker and Lifestyle database, so that's the CABLE database. They used multivariate linear models to measure the association and also evaluated the interaction effects of tea consumption with ApoE4 status and sex using a two-way analysis of covariance. They found that frequent green tea consumption was associated with a decreased level of CSF total tau protein, especially among individuals 65 years or younger. In contrast, there was no association with the levels of amyloid beta 42 and phosphorylated tau. In terms of sex differences, males with frequent green tea consumption had a significantly lower level of CSF total tau to A beta 42 and a modest trend toward decreased CSF total tau. That said, neither ApoE4 nor sex changed the association between green tea consumption and CSF biomarkers. Overall, these results suggest possible beneficial effects of green tea consumption on mitigating AD risk. Next, we have a study that looks at whether flavonoid intake can be neuroprotective against AD, which has previously led to inconsistent findings. So this was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition by first author Shishtar and last author Jacques. And the title of this paper is Long-Term Dietary Flavonoid Intake and Risk of Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementias in the Framingham Offspring Cohort. The authors wanted to examine the prospective relationship between total and 6 different classes of dietary flavonoid intake and the risk of AD and related disorders. And they wanted to address the limitations of previous observational studies in doing so. They followed flavonoid intake in 2,800 participants over an average of nearly 20 years, all of which did not have AD or related disorders at baseline. Over this time frame, 193 participants developed AD or related disorders, of which 158 specifically had AD. After adjusting for multiple variables, including other dietary factors, individuals with the highest intake of flavonoids, especially anthocyanins and flavonoid polymers, had a lower risk of AD and related disorders relative to individuals with the lowest intake. So overall, these results suggest that higher long-term dietary intake of certain classes of flavonoids is associated with lower risks of AD and related disorders in U.S. adults. And from now on, I'll probably refer to AD and related disorders as ADRD, as this is something that comes up a lot throughout these papers. Okay, next we have a study that is more mechanistic. Specifically, it is about how vitamin C, or ascorbate, deficiency may exacerbate changes in dopamine neurotransmission in Alzheimer's disease. So ascorbate is an important antioxidant, which is often depleted in AD due to dietary deficiencies and disease-related oxidative stress. This was published in the Journal of Neurochemistry by first author Consoli and last author Harrison. And the title is Ascorbic Deficiency Decreases Dopamine Release in Gulo Knockout and APP-PSN1 Mice. So I think that's Gulo Knockout. It's Glu. Okay, never mind. Yes, that's what it is, but you can check the paper title in the bibliography. All right. So dopamine is crucial for learning, memory, and motivational processes, and is highly susceptible to oxidation. Impaired dopamine neurotransmission in AD could underlie symptoms such as decreased motivation, anhedonia, and sleep disorders. In this study, the authors investigated the effects of ascorbate deficiency and AD pathology on the dopaminergic system. To do so, they crossed Gulo knockout mice, which depend on dietary intake to maintain adequate ascorbate tissue level, with APP-PSEN1 mice, and the latter is an AD mouse model. They then provided either sufficient or depleted ascorbate to these mice through their diet from weaning until 12 months of age. Using fast-scan cyclic voltammetry in brain slices, the authors showed that chronic ascorbate depletion and the APP-PSEN1 genotype both independently decreased dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens, which is the hub for motivational behavior and reward, whereas dopamine clearance was intact. When they looked in striatal tissue containing nucleus accumbens, they found that ascorbate deficiency decreased the levels of dopamine and its metabolites, namely DOPAC, 3-MT, and HVA. Lastly, there was a cumulative effect of ascorbate and the APP-PSEN1 genotype in the enzymatic activity in dopaminergic neurons. Together, these findings suggest that ascorbate deficiency could contribute to the non-cognitive behavioral changes of AD by decreasing dopamine availability during synaptic transmission. And if synaptic transmission in AD is a topic of interest for you, we have a whole episode on that. So that's under our disease mechanism theme. We have an episode dedicated to synaptic transmission. Check that out. All right, moving on to the next paper. This one is on whether an interaction of high folate with low vitamin B12 status impedes cognitive function, although it's unclear whether it's in relation to AD per se. Regardless, I will present it to you. So the title is High Folic Acid or Folate Combined with Low Vitamin B12 Status, Potential but Inconsistent Association with Cognitive Function in a Nationally Representative Cross-Sectional Sample of U.S. Older Adults Participating in the NHANES. All right, I feel like that just summarized the paper for you, but I'll still have a go. And this was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition by first author Bailey and last author Miller. The authors evaluated whether the combination of high folate and low vitamin B12 status was associated with cognitive function using various definitions of high folate status. They collected cross-sectional data from older adults, which they characterized based on serum folic acid levels and B12, and you can check the abstract for specific concentrations, and they compared performance on 4 different cognitive tests. For individuals with high folate and low vitamin B12 status, the authors noted a significant interaction between scoring low on the digit symbol substitution test and the animal fluency test. Among individuals with normal vitamin B12, higher unmetabolized folic acid or serum total folate was protective on a delayed recall task, which is called the CIRAD-DR task. You can check the paper for more details, but the takeaway is that in older adults, low vitamin B12 was associated with cognitive impairment both independently and in an interactive manner with high folate for certain cognitive tests. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little. This next study is on how weight loss, which is associated with higher mortality and cognitive decline, associates with magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, changes related to AD. This was published in Alzheimer's and Dementia, and the first author is Verhaar, and the last author is Van der Vlier, and the paper title is Nutritional Status and Structural Brain Changes in Alzheimer's Disease, the New DAD Project. Not New DAD, that's NUDAD Project. The study followed 412 patients divided into AD dementia, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, and control groups. The authors analyzed associations between nutritional status and MRI measures using linear regression and adjusted for age, sex, education, cognitive function, and cardiovascular risk factors. They found that multiple indicators of lower nutritional status, including BMI, and so that's body mass index, and fat mass, were associated with higher medial temporal atrophy scores. There was also an association with greater microbleeds, but this was only significant in the MCI group. These results suggest that lower nutritional status is associated with some structural brain changes, particularly in mild cognitive impairment. All right, so before we move into our next section on obesity and diabetes and vascular risk factors, we have one final paper that is not on low weight or on obesity, but rather it's on the variability in body weight. And this has recently been recognized as a biometric associated with high risk factor for various diseases. And so the authors wanted to see whether variability in body weight is also associated with AD. The title of this paper is Variability in Body Weight Precedes Diagnosis in Dementia, a nationwide cohort study. It was published in Brain and Behavior by first author Ha and last author Cho. This group conducted a nationwide population-based cohort study in order to determine the association between body weight variability and dementia. Over 2.8 million adults with a mean age of 51.7 years, without a history of dementia, who had undergone at least 3 health examinations between 2005 and 2012, were followed up until the date of dementia diagnosis or until 2016. Cox regression models showed that the risk of AD and vascular dementia increased with high body weight fluctuation, an association that remained consistent in various subgroup analyses and sensitivity analyses. Thus, body weight variability could potentially act as a predictor of Alzheimer's disease and of vascular dementia. And on that note, let's take a quick break. My hand is getting a little sore from gripping the microphone, so I'm going to put it down and come right back. And I'm back. I hope you enjoyed that little musical interlude. That was a piece from Anusha's music. Anusha is a fellow podcast host and a good friend of mine and my old lab mate, and I encourage you to check out her music if you enjoyed that. So let's move straight into the next section. So in this section, we have 6 papers on obesity, diabetes, and vascular risk factors, and it continues nicely from our last few papers on poor nutritional health and weight loss and weight variability. This first paper that we'll be looking at is on obesity and high BMI and whether that's linked to AD. So the title of this paper is a little difficult to say. It's Body Mass Index and Age Effects on Brain 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, a positron emission tomography study. This was published in Molecular Imaging and Biology. The first author is Bini and the last author is Huang. For context, prolonged excess of the glucocorticoid steroid stress hormone cortisol can lead to visceral adiposity, insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, memory dysfunction, cognitive impairment, and more severe AD phenotypes. The conversion of inactive cortisone to active cortisol is catalyzed by the intracellular enzyme 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, which is also abbreviated to 11-beta HSD1, the amount of which has never been quantified directly in vivo. In this study, the authors used PET scans with an 11-beta HSD1 inhibitor radioligand in nearly 30 participants, including lean, overweight, or obese individuals. After PET imaging, a linear regression model was used to determine correlations of mean whole brain and regional distribution volume, so I'll refer to that as VT of the radioligand, with BMI and age. The authors found significant correlations of whole brain mean VT with BMI and age, and when adjusted to age, the mean whole brain VT was significantly lower in obese individuals. You can check the abstract for more details on how regional distribution varied between obese and lean individuals. But overall, this in vivo PET imaging study provided the first evidence of a correlation between higher BMI, so specifically obesity, and lower levels of the enzyme 11-beta HSD1 in the brain, and showed that 11-beta HSD1 levels increased with age. Relatedly, this next paper looked at the association between cholesterol profiles and risk of cognitive decline in older adults with or without vascular risk factors, so those are VRFs. This was published in Aging? Let me check that for a second. So, predictably, the journal is called Age and Aging, but I still personally find it a bit redundant. Anyways, The paper is called Cholesterol Profiles and Incident Cognitive Decline Among Older Adults, the Shanghai Aging Study. The first author is Ding, the last author is Deng. And this was a prospective, community-based cohort study set in Shanghai, in which the authors followed over 1,500 dementia-free participants aged 60 years and older for an average of 5.2 years. Participants were categorized into the VRF groups if they had at least one of the following. So that's obesity, diabetes, hypertension, stroke, and coronary artery disease. Total cholesterol, low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, so that's LDL cholesterol, and high-density lipoprotein, so that's HDL cholesterol, were measured in serum at baseline. At follow-up, a diagnosis of incident dementia and Alzheimer's disease was established, and Cox regression was used to assess the association of diagnosis with cholesterol. Multivariate linear regression was also used to assess the relationship between cholesterol and the annual rate of decline of the participant's mini mental state examination score. The authors found that total cholesterol and LDL were inversely associated with incident dementia in VRF-free participants. They also found a significant correlation between incremental total cholesterol, LDL, and a slower annual decline on the mini mental state examination score. The authors conclude that the effect of cholesterol on cognitive decline may be modified by vascular risk factors. Here's another one on vascular risk factors and how they contribute to Alzheimer's biomarkers and the conversion rate from MCI to dementia. This was published in Alzheimer's Research and Therapy by first author Cheng, last author Chen. And the title of this paper is The Contribution of Vascular Risk Factors in Neurodegenerative Disorders, from Mild Cognitive Impairment to Alzheimer's Disease. This study followed nearly 300 newly diagnosed MCI subjects who were enrolled over 12 years for a cross-sectional assessment of vascular risk factors and Alzheimer's plasma and imaging biomarkers, as well as a cognitive outcome assessment 2 years into the study. The authors tested the association between vascular risk factors and AD biomarkers, adjusting for age, gender, education, and ApoE4 allele. They also looked at how vascular risk factors associated with the conversion to dementia by additionally adjusting for baseline mini mental state examination scores. The authors found that higher low-density lipoprotein, so that's LDL, at baseline was associated with more advanced plasma AD biomarkers, including amyloid beta 42 to 40 ratios and tau levels. In terms of imaging biomarkers, a history of hypertension was associated with more advanced white matter hyperintensity, whereas statin therapy for dyslipidemia, which is an abnormal amount of lipids, was associated with less advanced white matter hyperintensity. Statin therapy also reduced the risk of conversion to dementia at the 2-year cognitive assessment, while individual vascular risk was not associated with cognitive outcome. These results suggest that dyslipidemia may contribute to AD-related neurodegeneration in people with MCI, while hypertension may contribute to vascular pathology, and that statin therapy should be investigated further as a potential therapeutic strategy. Okay, this next paper is an Easter egg. It's not on AD per se, but rather whether a beta secretase, so a BACE1 inhibitor, could help treat vascular disease associated with diabetes. I've included it since we just learned that treating vascular risk factors may help reduce the risk of dementia, but feel free to skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to get into mechanistic stuff. So the title of this paper is Elevated Circulating Amyloid Concentrations in Obesity and Diabetes Promote Vascular Dysfunction. The first author is Meakin and the last author is Ashford, and this was published in the Journal of Clinical Investigations. The authors report that diet-induced obesity in mice increased both plasma and vascular amyloid beta 42, which was associated with decreased nitric oxide bioavailability endothelial dysfunction, and increased blood pressure. Genetically or pharmacologically reducing base-1 activity, or amyloid beta 42, prevented and reversed, respectively, these outcomes. On the other hand, expressing human mutant APP, or infusing amyloid beta 42 into control diet-fed mice, and this was to mimic the levels seen in obese mice, impaired nitric oxide production, vascular relaxation, and it also raised blood pressure. Mechanistically, higher amyloid beta 42 reduced the activity of endothelial nitric oxide synthase, cyclic GMP, and protein kinase G, and this was irrespective of diet, whereas endothelin 1 levels were increased by diet and amyloid beta 42. The authors conclude by pointing out that base-1 inhibition is a potential avenue for therapeutic development, more specifically in treating vascular disease associated with diabetes. And relatedly, this next paper is on how taking oral hypoglycemic drugs to treat type 2 diabetes affects the risk of AD and more specifically of memory decline. So this was published in Alzheimer's and Dementia by first author Wu and last author Sfadfager. I tried to look up the pronunciation, but I got variable results. So again, a good reminder to look at the bibliography, which is timestamped and will give you more information on all of the papers we summarize. All right, this study included around 1,200 elderly participants with normal cognition and around 800 AD dementia participants who are using a hypoglycemic medication identified from the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center database. The authors evaluated delayed memory using the Wechsler Memory Scale Revised Logical Memory Test and looked at associations between oral drug classes and memory over time. They found that in participants with normal cognition, metformin use was associated with better memory performance over time, whereas in AD participants, dipeptidyl peptidase 4, or DPP4 inhibitor, use was associated with a slower rate of memory decline. When the authors looked at interaction effects, it appeared that DPP4 inhibitor use had a greater benefit among ApoE4 carriers. These findings suggest intriguing associations between different oral hypoglycemic drugs and memory change that were not consistent between cognitively normal participants and those with AD dementia, and that ApoE4 genotype plays a modifying role. Okay, here's another paper on high-fat diet in mice, and this time the authors test a potential therapeutic as well. This was published in Nutritional Neuroscience. That sounds good. And the first author is Plusinska and the last author is Platt. The title of this paper is High-Fat Diet Exacerbates Cognitive and Metabolic Abnormalities in Neuronal Base-1 Knock-in Mice, Partial Prevention by Fenretinide. The authors compared the effects of high-fat diet on metabolic and cognitive phenotypes in 5-month-old diabetic base-1 knock-in mice, so these are PLB4 mice, and in wild-type control mice. They also examined whether any resulting phenotypes could be normalized with a synthetic retinoid, this is fenretinide or fen, which promotes weight loss. Fenretinide is also a FDA-approved drug to treat cancer, so this paper could also fit under our repurposing drugs episode under clinical treatment or clinical development. If you're interested in papers of that sort, I encourage you to check out that episode. Anyways, so male wild-type and PLB4 mice were sorted into 4 groups. So the first group was controlled chow diet. The second was 45% saturated fat diet, so that's the high-fat diet. The third was high-fat diet with a 0.04% fen treatment, so high-fat diet plus fen. And the last group was controlled chow diet with the same fen treatment, so that's just fen. After 10 weeks on these diets, the authors assessed basic metabolic parameters, circadian rhythmicity, spatial habituation, and working memory. They also collected the hypothalamus, forebrain, and liver tissues for Western blots, qPCR, and ELISAs. They found that the high-fat diet drastically worsened metabolism and led to early mortality, so that's 40%, in otherwise viable PLB4 mice, and also exacerbated their spatial memory deficits. Fen treatment improved the outcomes of for these mice, despite no effects on glucose intolerance. Fen also had a positive effect on high-fat diet-fed wild-type mice, where it reduced weight gain, glucose intolerance, and hepatic steatosis. The authors list several physiological changes linked to high-fat diet, including enhanced cerebral astrogliosis and altered base 1 transcription in the hypothalamus, as well as other proteins you can check out in the abstract and in the paper. Overall, these results show that high-fat diet leads to early mortality and worsens cognition in this AD mouse model, and that fenretinide treatment could prevent some of these adverse effects. So that brings us to our last paper, which is actually in another subtheme, which is exercise. And we just have one paper on exercise that fits under the modifiable risk factor theme this month. Specifically, it's on how physical fitness relates to cerebral blood flow. So decreased cerebral blood flow in certain brain regions is a feature of aging and of Alzheimer's disease, and it could be predictive of cognitive decline. This paper is by first author Doherty and last author Cook. It was published in Brain Imaging and Behavior, and the title is Fitness Independent of Physical Activity is Associated with Cerebral Blood Flow in Adults at Risk for Alzheimer's Disease. As both fitness and physical activity are associated with many indicators of brain health, including positively influencing cerebral blood flow, the authors wanted to determine the unique contributions of each. 100 participants from the Wisconsin Registry for Alzheimer's Prevention, who were cognitively normal at baseline, underwent a maximal exercise test, physical activity monitoring, and 3D arterial spin labeling MRI scans. After accounting for physical activity, age, gender, ApoE4 status, family history of AD, education, and handedness, there was a significant association between fitness and cerebral blood flow. Interestingly, these results appear to be sex-dependent. Fitness level, independent of physical activity, had a positive effect on cerebral blood flow in brain regions affected by aging and Alzheimer's in female participants, but not in male participants. And that concludes part 1 of 3 modifiable risk factors theme for papers published in August 2020. I will be back for part 2 and part 3 soon, as well as some papers on clinical, non-pharmacological approaches, actually, and some, what else am I doing? Some preclinical testing, so animal models looking at potential therapeutics for AD. And of course, there will be a bunch of other episodes hosted by other members of our team. If you're interested in joining us or have feedback, please reach out. And with that, I'll let Sarah give the final little spiel. All right, see you again soon.
That's it for this episode. A huge thank you to the team that is working on sorting, summarizing, and scripting these abstracts, as well as the operations behind AMiNDR. The music is from Journey of a Neurotransmitter by Anusha Kamesh, musician and fellow scientist, and now member of the AMiNDR team. You can find the original piece and her other music on SoundCloud under Anusha Kamesh or on her YouTube channel, AK Music. Interested in joining the team? Give us a shout! We can always use help with content development, podcast editing, advertising, and you can be part of a new and exciting venture. Reach us by email at aminderpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter. Oh, we're also on Facebook now. Don't forget to subscribe to our mailing list if you want access to the bibliography for each of our episodes.
The references come with timestamps. Timestamps. So you can more easily locate the paper that caught your interest. Check our notes below for details on how to sign up. And very close to this, you'll also find a link to our feedback survey. Because, yeah, your feedback matters to us. So please, pretty please, let us know how we can make this podcast a better tool for you. And last but not least, thank you for tuning in with us. And on this note, we hope you found our podcast useful and accessible. Until next time.